Bless you. Okay. So we're doing chapter 19. The big title of it is the rise and reform of industrial cities. So basically, to kind of sum that up for you, we are all of a sudden going to bless you. We're going to have a modern city emerge, and the very first thing we're going to notice once these modern cities emerge is how bad they are and how we need to fix them. It's kind of like public education. Everybody is always saying that public education used to be so much better and we need to fix it and make it better again, though pointing to actually that point in which it was fabulous, it seems to elude everyone. Anyway. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the creation of our new industrial city. And before we can talk about industrialization in the city, is we need to go back to, well, if industrialization is only now recently in the city, where was it before? What's that? Yeah. City, it used to be that that factories were done in the countryside, and why? It's up there, but the Marquez people know exactly why the factories were originally in the countryside. No Marquez people here?
Well, because of the water.
Yeah, it's because of the water. Water for?
Power.
Water for power. Water and power. Okay. So the using water power is going to be the reason why, if you think of early factories, do you think Boston? No. They're in Lowell. And the reason why they're in Lowell is because that's where the rivers were. In Lowell, they were able to dam up part of a river, create a canal, and then what they did with this canal is they brought it out to a point where they could then drop the water more steeply. And by dropping that water more steeply, what do they generate? More power. And so this is the reason why things were done in the countryside. In the countryside, there was also more raw materials, and then finally, more workers. Because who were the original workers, particularly in Lowell? Yeah, farm girls. And so so that's the reason why it is in the countryside initially. So if industrialization isn't in the city at this time, what was? It was a seaport. So you look at the first big cities in America, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Charleston. What do they have in common? They are seaports. They international trade or even coastal trade between cities or colonies. That's why those became these cities initially. New York took on a secondary huge function. It later became perhaps the financial capital of the United States. That Wall Street was another reason for New York to exist as a city, but not industrialization. What brings industrialization to the cities is the steam engine. By no longer is geography important. No longer having a river next to you is the most important thing in order to be industrial. And so once you have a steam engine, you can manufacture pretty much anywhere. Now, once you have brought now being a seaport, being a financial center, and being a manufacturing center to the cities, what's going to start to happen to the size of the cities?
Grow.
Going to grow. And so this is it's by bringing in this final thing that it's going to start making cities grow to the levels that they eventually will. Okay, it's a magnet. It's a person magnet. It's a people magnet. The other thing that helped shape the modern city is mass transit. The Americans, as you know today, we are a nation of commuters. It's something I feel as where I work and where I live are in separate places. I have to get from Westchester to the Palisades every day. Okay, I'm a commuter, and this idea of commuting starts to develop as these cities start to take off in size. The early commuters took trains and trolleys, and they are going to help create a something that had not existed before. It was something known as the suburbs. Now the word is weird. When you think of a city, it's called urban, and you think of not city, it's rural. Well, this thing that developed wasn't quite really city-ish, but it wasn't really rural either, so it became suburban, okay? The suburbs, suburban, like the car. The other thing is that by having some sort of mass transportation, you could even have it within your city limits. And that meant that the city no longer had to be walkable. If you look at early Boston, okay, what is truly the city of Boston, you can walk the whole thing. Okay? Today, incorporated into the city of Boston are places like Cambridge, but Cambridge was a separate town initially. You would have to ride in on a horse from one town to another. The original Boston is all walkable. But with mass transit, good day. With mass transit, okay, we are able to make it so that a city can grow, and you can take a bus from one side of the city, or a train, or a trolley car from one end of the city to another. The main transportation in these early cities were electric trolley cars. But there was a problem with the electric trolley car, is that they went on the same roads as the people and the horses and the everything else. And if you're in the same place as all the people and everything else, what invariably is going to happen? Well, you're going to have accidents. And we, by the way, have learned this a lesson all over again here in Los Angeles. As we are trying to re-implement a mass transit system, we are putting some of our trains on the same place that streets, cars, and people are. And what's happening, particularly on the Blue Line, is that there have been accidents. Now, in New York, they figured out a long time ago that having trains and people right next to each other was a bad thing. So they put all of their train lines pretty much underground. That's why they have a subway system. In Chicago, it was not as easy to do. So what they did, instead of doing a subway, they decided to put their trains basically up in the air. And they have what they call the L, or the elevated trains. So you have to take a stairs up to get to the trains. And you have all these train lines going around kind of above everyone's heads. But again, the reason for it is to get the people and the trains away from each other so they don't kill each other. Yeah?
So our city was stupid enough to put trains next to people again?
Yeah, we started to do that. We tried to do subways, but the way that Los Angeles is, there's a lot of natural gas and whatnot underneath our city, and every time we try to build things blow up. It's very sad. We tried the red line, but it has been fairly disastrous. So we'll see if you go to Westwood You see where the train is coming through down on Westwood Boulevard. They're trying to put big fences around it and everything like that.
It's really
but
easy to get in.
Yeah. So. The other thing that the mass transit is going to do, however, is it's going to reshape our cities socially. When you had the walking city, what was the coolest place to be? Downtown. Okay? I'm downtown. I'm in the center of things. Aren't I awesome? And so therefore, guess where the elites lived? Guess where the rich lived? They lived in the center of things. But with mass transit, our cities get transformed. Our cities get changed. And what ends up happening is the people with a little bit of money will decide that maybe living downtown, as it is getting crowded, as it's getting more congested, maybe that's not as cool. And what would be cooler is maybe I could move out to a spot of land, I could have a lawn, I could be safe from the crowds. And so what happens is these suburbs develop, and who lives in the suburbs? Essentially people with at least a little bit of wealth. And who ends up then in the core, the urban core of the city, are people who can't afford the mass transit. The people whose wages are lower. So our city basically transforms. It used to be kind of the rich in the center, okay, and you were poorer further away. Now it was richer on the outskirts, and in a sense poorer in the center. The other thing that changes is how cities basically looked visually. Cities, when they were smaller and there were less people in them, were kind of maybe a couple floors up. But now, as the populations are getting denser, how do you get that many people into a smaller place? You got to start stacking them up. And so you start getting buildings that are taller for people to live. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, tenement buildings. And office places will also start to be taller. We'll start to build buildings that we call skyscrapers. Now, the reason we were able to do this was some technological changes. The steel is now cheaper. And basically, rather than doing everything with concrete and stuff like that, that other buildings and brick that other buildings have been made, they basically use these steel skeletons, and they use plate glass, and they're able to make buildings that are lighter, and thus you can make them taller and taller. The other thing that makes it so you can have a taller building is, well, how many floors are you willing to climb? On your new iPhone, it says how many flights of stairs you go in a day. But in reality, how many are you willing to do? Are you willing to go up 3 floors, 4 floors every day, 5 floors if you had to walk it? Well, with power, with electric power, we are able to start using elevators to get people up higher and higher in buildings, and make it so that it is not an inconvenience. And if it's not a convenience, are people more willing to invest and be part of it? Absolutely. So that brings us to our last point. Is the other thing that transforms the city is electricity. First of all, with the elevators, but secondly, with the lighting. If you went to a city in the 1870s, now you would have maybe street lights, some, but not a lot of them. And one of the reasons why you're not going to have a lot of lighting in cities is because lighting was done by gas lamps. And and to A, do the structure of bringing in the gas lines and everything like that, and then B, having somebody, you know how Dumbledore had his lamp unlighter? Well, that's actually based on the fact that you used to have lamp lighters who would go around cities and basically light up the lamps every night, okay? That's a lot of manpower, that's a lot of labor. And so therefore, are you putting those lights everywhere? And the answer, no. But with electricity and the electric light bulb, okay, the incandescent electric light bulb, you can put more lighting in more places. And basically what happens in cities is that people feel safer in lights, and what you're going to find is that lights will be in some places, almost everywhere. I mean, so if you go to some streets, it's almost as bright as day with the amount of lights that they put in. Not only on street lights, but what also you light up store windows. Some store windows are lit up all night long, showing off products and things like that. Electricity completely transforms what a city looks like. All right. So, I want you to kind of bring this all together for me, but I want you to do it in a particular way. One of the themes that they want to hammer us with on the AP exam is change over time. To properly do change over time, you need to say what it is and how it changed. Okay, so or what it was before, what it was after. And so what I'd like you to do is just kind of choose maybe two things in American cities, and do that. What it was, what it became. What it was, what it became. Finish up the sentence you're writing. Okay, so I didn't print out my new Meet Me At sheets yet. So what I'd like to do is just write under this warm up White House, because you need to have your new White House, because you may have changed your residency as to where you're sitting right now. So you're going to need a new go-to person. Who's going to be the person that 1 out of 3 times when I can't figure out where I want you to go, I'll say White House, who are you going to discuss your thing with, okay? So, and so why don't you write their name down in your notebook.
I like it.
Okay.
Nick, do you remember all the time? Does that mean nothing? I will tell you how this changed. You have to like go to the dean, so it's literally one, like he makes you uncomfortable, like I don't like
Okay, so now that you found your person, trade with them one of your things.
I don't like swearing.
Trade with them one of your things.
And like this, I feel like how do you if you get your like my parents didn't come, if you're getting your parents, you're like you gotta be legit. You're so cities are quiet. I could have been there. Dude,
We have to do like activities done because of the exercise.
and then
Random ones, if you don't have it, like you know, at that point. Yeah, like
As well as the.
you can't say that.
Okay, so stop on. Okay, so Nick, what was one kind of change over time?
I said previously manufacturing usually was in the countryside or trading financial goods in the city, but later it seems to be a place where pretty much all aspects of business are.
Excellent. Okay, well done. Let's see, Justin H.
Okay. I said that cities went from having no lights to light bulbs, which made streets safer and added nightlife, and then cities went from having just houses, like regular one-story houses, to multi-story buildings, which brought more population.
Okay, excellent. And Rachel.
I said that the wealthier middle class still live in the middle cities and ended up moving to the suburbs.
Excellent.
Poor people live in the city.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Absolutely. Okay, so good. In all of your answers, you did the what you need to do when they say change over time. You have to make sure you do the what it was, what it became, and all of your answers hit that mark. So well done. When I talked about this city a moment ago, I mentioned how now that manufacturing is done in the city, it becomes a people magnet. And last semester we talked about some of the people that came to the United States. We talked about a new immigration coming to the United States in the 1880s, 1890s, okay? We call it new immigration. So American cities are going to be basically the home for millions of immigrants. It's a completely changing landscape of the United States. Now when people came here, so let's say I came from Poland, and I know nobody in the city. Am I going to just simply move to some random street somewhere randomly without the city? Or am I going to be drawn to a particular kind of place?
To your people.
To your people? So, obviously, it's natural. You go out to the quad, and people are drawn to the people they like, the people they know, the people that are like them. Okay, and this is so the city was like the giant quad, basically what would happen is that if you came from Poland, you had a tendency to go find other Polish people. In fact, even the entire neighborhood in which you live might now be called Little Poland. Italians, Little Italy, Chinatown, okay? So people were kind of drawn to their own ethnicity because it would help make them feel more comfortable. It would help them adjust or to life in America more easily. The other thing that these immigrants would rely on is that given they're living in a neighborhood that is kind of ethnically based, it might also have a newspaper that is in the language in which they speak. So in Little Italy, there might be one or even a couple Italian language newspapers to A, find out neighborhood events, B, maybe get news from back home. The other thing that that immigrants had a tendency to rely on, and it kind of fits within the same ethnic-driven idea, is if something goes wrong in your life today, okay, you lose a job, you need to go to the hospital, the entity that is kind of your safety net is the government. Okay, the government, now provides the Affordable Care Act supposedly. It now provides or encourages unemployment insurance. The government is basically kind of having your back. This is not true at that time. When you came to the United States, something happens, it's kind of on you. And what people kind of figured out is that just having it on you, that's not good enough. Let's say you even have a family and you now can't work. It being on you, well, that now affects other people. And so what developed, and was very prominent within these ethnic neighborhoods, were what we call mutual aid societies. And what a mutual aid, it's kind of like insurance, kind of like State Farm, but it also was kind of an alliance. Okay, so a group of people are going to all kind of pay into this mutual aid society and put, maybe once a month, put a couple bucks into this mutual aid society until it develops a nice, healthy fund. And then something happens to you, you break your arm at work, and you can't work for a week or something like that, then you might draw from the mutual aid society to help you out when things go tough. Okay? And these mutual aid societies not only served as this insurance thing, but they also were the society part of society. They were people would meet, and that's kind of where we get this kind of ethnic aspect of them. Is that people within Little Italy would be in a Little Italy mutual aid society, and they would hang out together and have social functions. And so this was kind of a way of breaking down those barriers of being here in the United States, or at least having some sort of safety net here in the United States. Yeah.
If somebody withdrew money from that, would they have to pay it back later on?
It really depends on the society as far as how the rules and whatnot were done. So it's kind of you were paying up front for possibly being cared for in the future. It's kind of like insurance in that way, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So the last thing, and certainly not the least thing, that we need to know about these people that are moving to these cities is that as these cities became more and more populated, the living quarters are going to become smaller and smaller. And we're going to start stacking people up. And that's where we're going to get what we call tenement buildings, where you're going to try and get as many people into a building as possible. And certainly the other thing that's going to affect is how much money you have. Even if you have a large family, if you do not have a lot of money, you may be only able to afford a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment for your very large family. And everybody gets crowded in. Now, these buildings, of course, oftentimes were privately owned, and people drawing the rent, the owners wouldn't necessarily be taking great care of them, and so the conditions in these places were often very, very, very poor. Besides immigrants moving to the cities and making up a huge part of the population of American cities at this time, we also are going to see another trend developing. And this was African Americans moving up from the South into American cities, particularly cities like Chicago, or even still in the South, places like New Orleans. It's a limited thing. It doesn't have. It's not like during the Civil War. During the Civil War, we begin what we call the Great Migration. The Great Migration is when large numbers of African Americans move out of the South to cities because of the availability of jobs to build things for the war. But even here in the 1890s, we start to see this limited movement. But when people arrived up in these cities, or just to places like New Orleans, what they're going to find is that they're not going to be treated well. We talked a couple times ago about how immigrants were treated, how there was an anti-immigrant sentiment out there. There was a nativist movement out there. But African Americans, when they tried to join the workforce in American cities, they were oftentimes treated far worse than immigrants were. In fact, they would oftentimes be denied jobs on the shop floor unless there was a strike and they were being called upon to be strike breakers. The other thing that happened was that if there were any sort of rumor of a crime involving an African American, it oftentimes would result in race riots. So discrimination, race riots were both things that were fairly prominent, and this is just with the limited number of people moving up north. The other thing, however, that changes here in the United States, largely due to African American immigration northward, is culture. We see developing at this time new forms of music, particularly blues and ragtime music. This is actually one of the things that I particularly think is important, because when you come in, I usually play for you music that is either from the time period or reminiscent of the time period. Now all of a sudden we are getting to really good music. So some of the pieces, I'm not sure if they were playing when you came in, but ragtime, you heard Scott Joplin was in the soundtrack. Blues, I put on Robert Johnson. So important change. Question?
It was about the modernist jazz and
Yeah.
how they started creating.
Yeah. So out of ragtime will eventually emerge jazz. Other cultures emerged as cities grew as well, and what we kind of know about cities is that cities usually provide more entertainment. For college, I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. It's a fabulous little town. I loved going there. But entertainment-wise, if I wanted to go see Bruce Springsteen in concert, was he coming to San Luis Obispo? Absolutely not. Okay, so you had to go to the city. Okay, so back then you had the new things that were emerging that were principally just in the cities were things like Nickelodeons. What's a Nickelodeon? It's a well. It's not. It's a thing. It's a thing. The channel was named after the thing. Do you know what was the thing? Yeah, nickel movies. That's the reason why it's called a Nickelodeon. You paid a nickel to see a movie. Okay, you paid a nickel to see a movie. And now it would have been before even they had some of them even before electricity, where you can hand crank it. And I think if you go to Disneyland, they used to have things where you can they still have them.
They're in the penny store.
In the penny, yeah. So you can still see some of these things, but it's we also had amusement parks. Speaking of Disneyland, early versions, dance halls, vaudeville, stage acts. These things would all be in the city. These amusements are going to change society. Most notably, the change is the interaction between men and women. It's going to kind of change the dating and courtship rituals. The biggest change, perhaps, is in a more rural society, you're going to have a much more supervised type of dating ritual. It might even be so much supervised in which your parents choose who you are going to date and what you date them. You're what? So again, a lot more freedom. But freedom sometimes has its costs. And what kind of the cost of freedom is that it, in effect, is going to make women more vulnerable. And what the vulnerability is, the biggest part of the vulnerability was the fact that women made far less than men did as far as wages went. Oftentimes, half as much money for doing similar work and obviously having similar expenses. And so what kind of developed at that time was that women would sometimes, in effect, supplement their wages through what we call the treat system, where certain favors would be given for people who paid for food or presents or things like that. And so again, there is the freedom. People are much more free to do what they want to do. But because of the economic problems or economic differences in the city, there was an exploitation of a vulnerability. The other thing that a city would do is that it being so large, it had a tendency to be much more accepting of differences. Subcultures develop within cities. Most notably, a gay subculture will develop in most American cities. Now, what we'll see here is one of those things where something is allowed to exist, though it will still be harassed. So in a small town, the subculture probably would not exist. In the city, it could exist, but it would be harassed. the final thing kind of on culture that I want to talk about is how the elites played a role. When you start to have major cities, it kind of afforded the wealthy, who, remember, at this time, we have some people that are extraordinarily wealthy. And many of them, like Andrew Carnegie, believed that to die with so much wealth would be practically a sin. So many of these very wealthy people practice what we call philanthropy, where they would bestow gifts upon cities. And they would usually be things that, as far as Andrew Carnegie is concerned, he liked his gifts to be things that are useful. He liked to give money to projects that help people help themselves. And so what did he do? He built libraries. He said that he would build a library in any city that was willing to contain that library. And so there were literally hundreds of Carnegie-financed libraries across the country. Other things that might be built are museums, concert halls, anything that is kind of a mark, maybe of culture within a city, would probably be built by one of these philanthropists, or paid for by one of these philanthropists. Now, there is one thing that of course these philanthropists were getting back from this. What is kind of something that is going to be really kind of be giving back to them for donating these things to a city?
Good image.
What's that? Yeah, okay. So Andrew Carnegie, even if you didn't know he was a steel business guy, you knew about Carnegie Hall, right? So, we heard about Rockefeller, you're going, wait, Rockefeller Center, 30 Rock. So these people have their names live on, even beyond, obviously, their lifetime. All right, so choose one thing. If you were to kind of just say, do a quick summary, what would be one big idea that you could hold on to as far as cultural change that happens in these cities at this time? If you were choosing, from the stuff that we talked about, what would be the biggest thing? Okay, so finish that sentence that you're writing. Okay, so now I think I used Little Italy as an example. So Leaning Tower of Pisa? Wasn't that one of the things on the on our Meet Me Ads? Was it Kelsey?
I think particularly,
It was the Tower of Pisa? I was thinking in Italy. Is there anything in Italy? It is the Colosseum. Bingo, you were right. Okay, so right at the bottom of your of this warm-up, Colosseum. Now I want you to. This one is, since it involves immigration, it means movement. So I want you to lock eyes onto somebody who's at least a couple rows away or across the room. Okay, kind of make that mental connection. Okay, go to them and ask them to be your Colosseum. Okay. Okay, so it's movement. Everybody should be standing. Okay? Alright, everybody should be standing. Even if you're the person someone's walking to. Okay? There should be movement going on. Blood flow. It's important. Okay? Will you be my
Yeah, I did the acceptance of gays, have college friends, and
Come up with it.
And I was very scared. I've seen that.
Right, and so yeah, in the 1920s,
I did not. I thought literally the So yeah, well, I did not see anything. No issue whatsoever. No issue What do you mean? No, why would? No, you just said like you're gonna find.
all right.
No, I
So going back. Let's see. My fascination with the number 3. Let's see if I can get 3. Hey, we'll go with volunteers. Excellent. Yes.
I said that cities are now centers of entertainment culture.
Nice. Okay. Second volunteer. Is your right?
I kind of expanded on the entertainment thing. I said like more entertainment, but more choices, which means more freedom, which kind of extended to dating and like sort of the sexual orientation.
So you just did it as a strand.
Yeah.
I like that. All right. Yeah.
The culture became more diverse, innovative, urban, and more tolerant of diverse opinions and beliefs and more modern.
Okay. And stand up and give yours.
I said that cities became people became freer and courtship became freer and new forms of amusement, and it became a way for elites to showcase their wealth by funding libraries and stuff.
Nice. Okay, nicely done. All right, so we're going to shift a little bit. So we talked about city. Now we're going to just start onto the reform. And we're going to, in order to get there, we need to talk first about, we're calling it urban journalism, but let's first just go with the idea of journalism. Any writer, people, journalists, people in here? One, that's it? Two? All right, that's 3. All right, so we had 2 journalists, that's good. Okay. So on the first part of the journalism that kind of emerges at this time. Names you probably hopefully know. Okay? Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst. Okay, come on, these are names you know. Even if you didn't read, you know these names, right? Pulitzer what? Pulitzer Prize. Okay, so let's start with him. Pulitzer Prize. What is when you think of Pulitzer Prize? What is it? Well, especially journal. Yeah, it could be books. Okay, and what about it? What about if you got a Pulitzer? What is it telling you about your about what you wrote? Well written. It's something well regarded. It's something that that is supposed to be kind of the best.
That people should read.
Maybe that people should read. Well, ironically, even though we call it the Pulitzer Prize, okay, Joseph Pulitzer was not known for that type of journalism. Okay, Joseph Pulitzer built up a newspaper empire. I mean, he owns newspapers across the entire United States. And the reason why he is able to build up this powerful print empire is by selling the most salacious, sensational, human interest, okay? I was going to put sports in that category yet, but basically, it was driven on sales. And when you sensationalize something, what are you usually doing to it when you sensationalize it? What's that? You embellish it, okay? Hey, this story's not good enough. I got to make it better, okay? Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. Anyway, so Pulitzer and Hearst. William Randolph Hearst. Hearst, does that sound familiar to anybody? Hearst Castle, that's right. He's rich enough to have a castle right here in the United States, okay? Anyway, these guys, what do they control? Well, if they control newspapers across the country, well, this is before these things, okay? This is before the internet. This is before television. This is before radio. So where did you get your information? Newspapers. These people basically control the information of the United States. And they, as I mentioned, they sensationalized it, okay? And this kind of sensational version of the news, we've kind of given a name, okay? We call it yellow journalism. The name came from a comic book character called the Yellow Kid. That's less important than this term, yellow journalism. Does it? Has anyone heard it? The term yellow journalism? Is this something that is this a word or a term that is around anymore? Maybe not. It's a derogatory term. If you call something yellow journalism, you're basically saying that's not good stuff. That's not well researched. That's not well done. And again, it's sensational, but it can also sometimes be very, very powerful. Later, when we talk about American imperialism, it is going to be largely the press. It's largely going to be Pulitzer and Hearst, which are going to help push the United States into a war with Spain in 1898. And so why do they do it? To sell papers. Okay? So it's the better story was the one that led us to war. So that's the story they went with. So journalism. The journalism it's a very powerful thing. It's very and these two are going to become very wealthy because of it. But there was a second form of journalism that also emerged at this time. And what the second form of journalism was muckraking. Now it almost sounds as bad, if not worse. Muckraking. Okay? And what the muckrakers were is people were also urban journalists, but they basically wrote not necessarily for daily papers, but they would write for news magazines. Most notably and most impressively, in fact, you give it a little extra something, McClure's. Okay. What these magazines would do is they basically would start looking at the problems that were developing in the United States because of urbanization and industrialization. And they very, 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 very much focused on the problems, which is going to be the reason why they get the nickname muckrakers. We believe that it was President Teddy Roosevelt that coins this phrase. He took it from a book that was known as Pilgrim's Progress. And in the book Pilgrim's Progress, there was a character that was known as a muckraker, and what the muckraker did is exactly what it sounds like a muckraker did. He raked muck. Raked muck all day, all night, muckraking. But right above the head of muckraker was a golden chalice that would change his life. But he never saw it. And why did the muckraker never see the golden chalice? Because he was so much concentrating on the muck. And so what Teddy Roosevelt was trying to tell us is that he believed that they often focused too much on the negative side of American life, that they didn't have anything positive to say. Now, even though we do attribute this to Teddy Roosevelt, if there was an American president that actually listened to these people, it was actually Teddy Roosevelt. So even though he complained about them, he's actually going to be the first American president to truly take action regarding their concerns. Anyway, the so what? Well, the so what is they inspired people. Okay? They inspired readers to join reform movements. So in other words, what these people did is they said, these are the problems, and we need to do something about it. We're going to conclude this unit discussing what is known as the Progressive Era. The Progressive Era is a major era of change in the United States. It's going to be the era in which we change from a time in which the government doesn't have much concern for the welfare of its people to one which it actually starts to. And it's going to be the muckrakers who helped inspire this change.
Why was McClure so important? Like, why did you want to know?
He is going to be he's the editor of McClure. So McClure's is going to be kind of the most important of these magazines, as I'm going to tell you in just a moment. Okay, so McClure's. It's edited by a guy named Sam McClure, and Sam McClure had kind of a vision to what print journalism could be. Whereas Pulitzer and Hearst, it was all about sales. For McClure's, it was that the print could be a change agent. That knowing the information is all important. And to kind of show this, he's going to recruit as a writer to his magazine Ida Tarbell. Now, Ida Tarbell had written a little bit so that Sam McClure knew what her writing style was, but she had gone off to Paris and she was writing historical exposés and making like no money. And Sam McClure decides that her style of writing, given that it was so fact-based, that when she wrote, she painstakingly researched her information, and she was spot on in her details. That was who he wanted writing for his magazine. So he brings her to the United States to write for McClure. And one of the things that Ada Tarbell will do is she will write an expose on John D. Rockefeller. And she'll in effect take him down. Okay? Now, not many, I mean, I'm not sure if you guys remember when we talked about J.D. Rockefeller and how powerful he was. 96% of oil refineries owned basically by J.D. Rockefeller. Yeah?
So is this the introduction to Gossip magazine?
This is less about gossip and more about the facts. Okay? This is where you're going to have so this is kind of how Ada Tarbell did it. It was a multi-issue expose on J.D. Rockefeller, and so she starts off building the story. You know, where did he come from? How did he make his initial money? And she was extraordinarily complimentary about his skills, extraordinarily complimentary about how smart he was as far as the direction he went, and she drew you in, going, oh. And then she takes out the knife, and she starts saying, well, then how did he gain full control of oil in a particular region? Well, it was by making a secret deal with the railroads and making it so that the railroads charged him less to ship oil so he could undersell his competitors and then buy them out. She would then start writing about the industrial espionage, the spies that J.D. Rockefeller put in other countries. How he would buy up refineries and then sell less than the opponents next door until the opponents next door went under. Then he would buy them out and then start charging more again. All of these tactics, okay? And obviously, what's one of those things about Americans? What do we love? We love drama, and we love when you take on the big guy. And we love the stories of people rising, but what we like even more when they fall. Okay, and so this is basically going to. But can you see what obviously she's focusing on the dirty details, but is she exposing an actual problem? A second muckraker I'd like you to know is David Graham Phillips. Phillips wrote for Cosmopolitan, perhaps an earlier version of Cosmo than what we have today. I'm not sure if they would run this article anymore. What Phillips focused on was the United States Senate. And what he did is he painstakingly researched the background of all the members of the United States Senate. Back then there were 45 states, so 90 senators. And what he's going to find is that 75 of the senators had direct, not indirect, direct links to either the railroads or the trusts or major corporations. And so in effect what he argues is that in effect the Senate was not of the people, for the people, and by the people. Okay, it was of the trusts for the corporations and by the railroads. The final muckraker I want to share, there's one I'm going to tell you about a little later, but the final one for now is a guy by the name of Lincoln Steffens. Now, Lincoln Steffens, he also wrote for McClure's. And so again, that was one of the reasons why I told you to kind of take special attention to McClure's. What Steffens took on was city government. And what he saw as he basically, he's going to like research one city at a time. And as he goes to a particular city, he's going to, again, painstakingly detail the connection that city leaders had with corporations, okay? That corporations that might own the bridges or the gas lines or the electricity for that city had these very profitable connections with these city leaders. It was a shame. Okay. All right. So do you get a little picture, snapshot of kind of what the muckrakers are about? Okay. So that's Lincoln Steffens. That's Ida Tarbell with the coolest hat ever. Now, one last thing on Ida Tarbell. Obviously, if you're J.D. Rockefeller and you got more money than God, are you gonna let some little magazine try and take you down? And so he sues McClure's magazine, but McClure's will spend thousands of dollars, which was huge at that time. But what they're going to do is they are going to prove each and every one of Ida Tarbell's claims to be factual. And it turns out not to have been that hard because she was so painstakingly perfect in her research that this was, so in other words, not very many people in America could take on J.D. Rockefeller and live to tell about it. Except her. All right. So let's scratch that. Don't do it as a 3-column chart. Basically, what just very quickly get the essence. What are the differences? And if you can find a similarity, go for it. But I think the most important thing here is the distinction between yellow journalism and muckraking.
Where is it?
Can I get a volunteer to just kind of sum it up for me?
I did find one similarity.
Okay.
They're both trying to entertain the eye of the reader with a story.
Excellent. Okay. Any differences? Oh, come on, there were differences. Yeah.
yellow journalism appeals to the masses by like exaggerating and it's just like human interest instead of like factual information, and upgrading was more of an agent for change and like appealed to the masses by like having cold hard facts about like people that they didn't like and stuff, and it proved things, I guess.
Oh, interesting. Did you want to add to that, or that was what you're going to say? Okay, so well good. Snaps. Okay. Okay. All right. So, right on schedule here. This is really good. Lincoln Steffens, he took on the cities. And what Lincoln Steffens is going to show us is that almost every city, okay, in America had was under the control of an urban machine or a political machine. Now, the way this kind of operates is, first you got to know how the cities initially kind of developed. Now, the way cities kind of originally developed is that they relied on private developers. And it was private developers who would build roads, they would make the streetcars, they would provide water, they would provide gas, they would provide electricity. So this is all in the hands of private industry. And so the way this would work is, think about it. Has anyone ever heard of Torrance? Heard of Torrance? Okay, Torrance. So Torrance, well, it was a land development, okay? A land developer built houses there. Now, obviously, if you built houses, what do you want to do with those houses? You want to what them? You want to sell them, okay? You got to make money. Well, Torrance, okay, kind of think of where Torrance is and think of downtown Los Angeles. Is that really close? No, it's not really close. Well, so what the land developer did with Torrance is he then built an electric train from downtown to Torrance. So in other words, what was he doing? He was doing what? He's drawing people from the city. Okay, so in other words, why did that train? Was he doing that as a public service? Was he doing that for the greater good of humanity? Was that the reason why this was being built? No. He was building it to make money. Okay, and so he builds the train, and when you buy the house, you go, whoa, look, it's right here on the street lane. Yes, I can make it to work easily. But now he sells all the houses. Does he really want to operate that train anymore? No. And so I want you to kind of take this idea and think of that's how kind of privately based development was happening throughout the United States. People were building things to make money, but as far as the maintenance of it, the keeping up of it type of stuff, that they weren't as interested in. And that might create a problem if you build buildings and then all of a sudden you fill it up with all the tenants and what? It's not as important anymore. So we sometimes call this the private city. Oh, one last thing to think about. Let's say you're the company that got to provide the electricity to the city. You're the company. And once more time, the. What's missing here?
Competition.
Competition. So therefore, what are the prices? Okay. So it's either A, high costs because you have a monopoly, or B, you don't really want to provide a service anymore because you've already made your money. That's how the private city was built. Then the cities were run. Maybe. Oh, bad teacher. the cities were run by what we call political machines. Now, what a political machine did is that it's something that it was under the control of this bureaucracy that was made up of precinct captains, ward bosses, and what these people did is they will dispense jobs and arrange for services for people in the city. That's kind of that doesn't quite tell you what's really going on here. So this is how it worked. I want you to all think of, let's say, my grandfather, great-grandfather, Dennis Murphy. He arrives in the United States in 1873. Now, he gets here, he's got no money because Ireland was still extraordinarily poor at that time. It still had a surplus of people, and what they had a tendency to do was take some family members, ship them off to try and make money for the rest of the family. So Dennis Murphy arrives, he's got no money. He gets to the he gets to the wharf, he gets to the he gets off the boat, and he notices that this crowd is developing next to this guy. And so what do you do when you see a line by someone? What do? You join the line. So he goes off, he joins this line, and when he gets to the front of the line, this guy goes, "Do you need a job?" "How did you know? Saints be praised!" Okay? This guy's like heaven sent. So he tells him, where to go get a job, and then when he goes off, he gets this job, he maybe works it, and then he's got himself another problem. So he leaves work, and he's kind of trying to figure out what he's supposed to do next, and there's that guy again. He goes up to the guy and says, "Do you need a place to live?" "Oh my goodness!" And he tells him how to get a cheap flat. So, this relationship starts to develop. Let's say a month later, years later, Dennis Murphy breaks his arm. He can't work for a few days. Okay, he wasn't smart enough to get into a mutual aid society. All of a sudden, that guy shows up and he says, "You need something to tide you over until your arm gets better." You're a saint. Okay, so now it's election day. And on election day, there's that guy, and he's got his arm on the shoulder of some other guy. And in this neighborhood, it's going to be, since it was mainly Irish, because he's drawn to an ethnically Irish neighborhood. So this guy's Irish, and he's running, okay, for alderman. He's running for representation of this ward. Who am I voting for? Who's Dennis Murphy voting for?
Okay.
He's going for that guy's friend, right? And so basically what would happen is in exchange for votes, these services will be provided. Now it may sound like fabulous, but obviously was it the best job ever? Was it the best flat ever? No. Now let's say this boss, this guy now has a whole bunch of people throughout the entire city that are all under his control. What power does that give him? He controls the vote. So now the city council is about to vote on who's going to do which company is going to get the trash collection. Okay, does he know which company that's going to be? It's going to be his. So basically what these people did is they controlled the services, and therefore they controlled the city funds. Okay. We will continue with this next time. So I will see you on Tuesday, I guess. Tuesday.
We don't have school Monday.
But I'll find out.
You don't want to take all day?
Yes, so.
Yeah, I know that, but I...